So here's our topic. Humans are underrated, how the new high-value skills are essential to great medical care. The new high-value skills being the skills that are going to be most economically valuable as technology advances. This is the great issue that we have to deal with now, and it affects all of us. It affects all of you and me and everyone else. Advancing technology, as you know better than most, is a huge factor in every business, most certainly including yours. I mean, who's your surgeon? Well, the development of autonomous surgical robots, not today's surgical robots, but actually autonomous ones, is advancing very quickly. So this is something that they were developing at UC Berkeley to identify tumorous tissue and deal with it. And you may know, some of you will know, that this video is actually quite old. The technology for autonomous surgery has advanced far beyond this, so that recently you may have seen they were working with a system that was suturing pig intestines quite successfully. Now, it has a long way to go, but the technology is doing what it's doing, which is advancing quickly, even into fields that most people would imagine it could never be successful in. Now, I was talking about this very topic not so long ago, quite near here at Boston Children's Hospital. And I got on to talking a little bit about autonomous surgical robots, and it was a lunchtime talk. A hand went up, and it was a surgeon. He was still in his scrubs from the morning's work. And I thought, oh man, I'm in for it now. But no, that's not what he had to say. What he said was, yes, this is coming. And I have gray hair, I'll be okay. But I don't know what to say to my younger colleagues. Well, I don't know what to say to them either, and I'm certainly not making any firm predictions. This technology has a long way to go. But it's simply one example of a larger phenomenon across the entire economy. It's the great question that we now face, which is, what will people do better than computers? Because the technology is doing stuff that we never thought it would be able to do. High value, high stakes, highly paid work. This is a young lawyer doing what young lawyers have always done, the discovery process in a case, right? Going through enormous stacks of documents to see what's relevant. Except that, as you may know, and I think maybe a speaker on a previous day may have mentioned, young lawyers don't do this anymore. Software does it, and it does it better. The software can read hundreds of thousands of pages, 24 hours a day. It doesn't get tired, it doesn't get distracted. It can sort the documents for relevance at least as well as human lawyers do, and it can do something that no human lawyer can do, which is read 100,000 pages of documents and spot patterns that no human would be able to spot. Not just faster and cheaper, but better than humans. We're seeing it everywhere we look. And so, how do we answer this question? What will people do better than computers? Well, one thing we know not to do, don't ask what computers can't do. We often think, well, let's just figure out what it is that computers inherently cannot do. And then we'll do that. We'll be okay. The trouble is that whenever we do that, we get the answer wrong. We go back, we can find respectable, smart, mainstream people saying, for example, computers will never play chess at a very elevated level. Well, a computer beat the world champion 20 years ago to this year. Sometimes they said, computers will never translate languages very accurately, right? Well, maybe you have an app on your phone, as I have on my phone, the Google Translate app, which will translate anything you put in there from one among 130 languages into any other of the 130 languages and do it very well for free. And some very smart economists and technologists wrote, not that long ago, driving, it's just too hard, right? The mass of sensory input, the split-second decisions about making a left-hand turn, computers won't be able to handle it. Well, obviously they were wrong about that too. Whenever we ask this question, what computers can't do, we get it wrong. So instead, we should do something else. We should ask instead what humans are most driven to do. What is it that we, as human beings, will want to do and will value, regardless of what technology can do, simply because it is in our deepest nature to want to do that? It is hardwired in us. If we can answer that question, then we're getting someplace. And in fact, we can. It turns out that we can see quite clearly what we are hardwired to do and to value. These are the skills of deep human interaction, and they are increasingly making the difference. They are increasingly the skills that have economic value as technology advances. Now, we can talk a lot about how those skills are described. I put them into three categories. What makes us valuable? First of all, and above all, empathy. This is the foundation of everything else. And empathy is much more than just feeling someone else's pain, although it is that. Empathy is the ability to discern what someone else is thinking or feeling, whatever it might be, and to respond in some appropriate way. My photograph here might surprise you. Normally, when we think of empathy, we don't think of a soldier with a gun. But I show this picture for two reasons. First of all, it shows exactly what we're talking about. Two people looking each other in the eye, each trying to figure out what the other one is feeling or thinking, and to respond in some way. The other reason I put it up is because in all the work I've done on this subject, the institution I have found that is understanding the value of these deep human skills best and is training these skills most effectively is the U.S. military. And that surprises some people, but it doesn't surprise anyone who has been in or who has been involved with the military in the past 10 or 15 years. Empathy is the foundation of all the others. The second, what makes us valuable? Creative problem solving together. The problems that we face in all of our institutions today are too hard for anyone to solve all by themselves. We do it all with teams now, with groups. And what makes groups effective? There's good research on this, and it's not what we think. The IQ of the smartest person in the group counts for nothing. The average IQ of the group counts for a little. The factor that is greater than all the other factors combined is the social sensitivity of the people in the group, their ability to read one another. In other words, we're back to empathy again. And why is that the key? Because effective teams get a lot of ideas out onto the table, and then they come to an efficient consensus on what are the good ideas and what are the bad ones. Well, in a group, if you can tell that somebody else is wanting to speak up but isn't quite doing so, then you make sure you get them to speak up. And in the discussion, We all listen to the discussions and me say, these little tiny comments. Yeah. Oh, really? People with great social sensitivity can read those comments. And a group of such people will arrive at a good consensus quickly on what are the good ideas and what are the bad ones. The most effective groups are the ones that are most socially sensitive. By the way, that's mission control during Apollo 13, the mission where they really did say, Houston, we have a problem. One of the all-time great examples of creative problem solving together. And the third category of these deep human skills may surprise you. Storytelling. Why is this one of them? Well, because our organizations typically don't value storytelling. We value charts and graphs, and that's not going to change. We have to make our decisions on the basis of rational analysis of data, and we always will have to. The thing is that analyzing data, especially lots and lots of data, is exactly what the technology is doing better all the time. Unbelievably well. And trying to distinguish ourselves by our ability to analyze data is a game we're just never going to win. The technology is doing it better all the time. At the same time, we all know that if you want to change people's minds, if you want them to remember something, if you want to inspire people to action, tell them a story. That's Jack Welch, arguably the most influential business executive of the second half of the 20th century. A lot was written about why he was so successful. But he sometimes said the factor that everybody else missed was my ability to tell a story. These are the skills of deep human interaction that become more economically valuable, and it isn't just theory. What major employers most want now, this was a survey conducted by Oxford Economics of major employers worldwide. What are you most looking for now in employees? Look what they said. Relationship building, co-creativity and brainstorming, cultural sensitivity, ability to manage diverse employees. It's exactly what we've been talking about. That's what they need most now in their employees. Now, there's a lot of talk these days about technology maybe advancing to the point where we'll have zillions of people who don't have work at all. There simply won't be anything that they can do well enough to get paid for it. Well, if that's ever going to happen, I think it's a ways off. But I do think that what we're talking about is going to be the difference between high-value workers and low-value workers. Even assuming we'll all find work, what's going to make us valuable? The evidence increasingly says it is these skills of deep human interaction. And I found, among many examples, a particularly striking one because it involves writing software, which you think of as a business where the skills of human interaction are possibly the least required, right? The caricature is the person sitting in a cubicle just writing that software. And yet, I was talking to the chief information officer of one of the world's largest retailers. This guy hires hundreds of software writers. Here's what he said. What I most need now are people who are empathetic and collaborative. Exactly what we were just talking about. And he said they have to be empathetic because they have to feel the experience they're creating by writing that software. And they have to be collaborative because we have to solve all our problems in groups. He went further. I can't have a great IT architect who has to be locked in a room. Well, a great IT architect was like the stereotype of somebody you could lock in a room, right? Just lock them in and have them write. But no, even a great IT architect who isn't empathetic and collaborative is a low-value worker. Okay. A subtle point. Computers can do emotional tasks. And I gather that a previous speaker may have mentioned this already, but it's an important point. Because people think sometimes, okay, I'm getting it. Computers can't do emotion. We'll focus on that. We'll be okay. No. Computers can do emotional tasks. In fact, some of them better than us. So they can look at a person's face and distinguish whether a person is feeling a real emotion or is faking it. In this case, is the person really in pain or faking it? Okay. There is software that can look at a person's face and get it right 85% of the time. When humans looked at the same pictures and said, is it real or is it fake? They got it right 50% of the time. In other words, they had no clue, because you can get it right 50% of the time by flipping a coin. They then gave the humans some training and they got it right 55% of the time. The computer got it right 85% of the time. By the way, you may wonder, as I wondered, how did those researchers induce the real pain in the people who had to be feeling real pain? The answer is they had them put their forearm in a big bucket of ice water. Hold that in there for a minute or two and you're in real pain. By the way, the two on the left are fake, the one on the right is real. Computers can do emotional tasks, but we're hardwired to do them with other humans. Okay, that's me on stage with the Pepper robot that was developed in Japan. This was its first public appearance in the United States. And it's a ton of fun. I mean, it's really a remarkable device. These things are working in stores in Japan. And I had a great time on stage with it. Its body language in particular is uncanny. It's very expressive. And it can do more. It reads your emotions. It looks at your face. It listens to your tone of voice. It listens to the words you're speaking. It understands what you're saying. So it's really something. And it does more than that. After I interacted with it, it kind of rolled itself back to a corner of the stage while I was up there speaking and kind of shut itself down like this, head down, arms crossed. But if I ever glanced back, just glanced back at it like that, it would lift its head up, look at me, eyes open, as if to say, yeah? You wanted to say something? It's quite uncanny. And yet, I never had the sense that I was interacting with a person, right? We are hardwired to do these things with other humans. There is a magic that happens face-to-face like this. Okay, in this research, you can see they're wearing sensors on their heads to measure brain activity. People face-to-face talking. The same regions in their brains are lighting up at the same time. When we talk about the wonderful feeling of being in sync with another person, it's actually not a metaphor. It's reality. We are in sync with them, like this. But this same thing, same people next to each other, having the same conversation, but back to back, not face to face, the synchronization disappears. It happens when we are in person, face to face. It is deeper than we tend to realize. When we are talking with one another in person, face to face, the pupils of our eyes dilate and constrict in sympathy with one another. We're not consciously aware that it's happening at all, but it is happening. And the researchers find that this builds trust. Our brains literally synchronize. We unconsciously mimic one another's posture. We mimic one another's tone of voice. We're not consciously aware that it's even happening, but it's all happening, and it builds trust. There's further evidence that digital connectedness may actually harm well-being. We've all seen this picture, right, in our lives, quite possibly in our own homes, right? They may actually be texting one another, for all we know, right? We've seen that too. There is evidence that increasing digital connectedness is not good for people. These skills of deep human interaction begin to atrophy. There's further research that social media use predicts feeling less happy and less satisfied with one's life. Okay. Well, here we begin to see some of the effects in healthcare, and they are remarkable. The many benefits of empathy in healthcare are multiplying as the research reveals them. It shows, for example, that when caregivers are high in empathy or other measures that reflect empathy, because there are these clinical scales that allow us to measure it, patients are more likely to comply with instructions about medication or other matters. Now, if we were purely rational beings, that would make no sense. The instructions are the instructions. But we are not just rational, we are social beings. In addition, there is other research that shows that empathetic doctors learn more, so their diagnoses and prognoses are more accurate. Separate research showed that internal medicine residents who rate low in empathy make more medical errors. Most important, the evidence shows that patients have better outcomes when their doctor rates higher on these empathetic scales. A couple of big studies, 21,000 patients, 271 doctors, evaluated clinically on an empathy scale. This was regarding diabetes. Patients with highly empathetic doctors showed better control of blood sugar and LDL cholesterol, fewer acute complications than did patients with low empathy doctors. Again, this should make no sense. This shouldn't matter. And yet it does matter. It is the reality of social beings. It's the way we are. Now, you can't help noticing that the effect, every effect of higher doctor empathy reduces costs. Doctors make more accurate diagnoses and prognoses. They commit fewer errors. Patients are more likely to follow instructions, become healthier, and suffer fewer complications. And in addition, empathy saves money in another way. It makes patients less likely to sue. Separate research underscores this. One study shows that even a surgeon's tone of voice affects the likelihood of a patient suing, and that is entirely separate from whatever the doctor is saying. Again, it makes no sense. Why should tone of voice affect whether someone is going to sue? It has no standing, it has no meaning in law, but it does. There is further evidence that has surprised me from the people running the HR departments in corporations, the benefit departments, okay? They are stopping giving monetary incentives for healthy behaviors. This was a very promising approach, but many of them are now changing and instead giving monetary incentives for bringing people together. So a walking club, well, that's great, the walking's great. But what they find is the real benefit to well-being comes from getting the people together. Similarly with volunteering. Volunteering's great, right? But the real benefit of this, and the reason companies are encouraging more volunteering on the part of their employees, is the benefit that comes from simply getting the people together. They're discovering also that having health coaches is particularly effective because people value the face-to-face experience. The effects are real, and these are people making dollars and cents decisions about how to get the greatest effect from the money they're spending. By the way, when it comes to these skills of deep human interaction, who do you think is better, men or women? You get one guess. Is it the nerd or Oprah? I admit that my photographs have kind of stacked the deck on this one. There's evidence on it, there's research, but do we really need the research? Don't we all know from life experience that in general, on average, women are better than men at these skills? Now that's on average. It doesn't mean every woman's better than every man. That would not be correct. But on average they are. And in addition, we can all get better at these skills no matter who we are, and that is a critically important point. The skills of deep human interaction are skills. They're not something you're born with or not. They're not something you've got or you don't. They are skills that can be built, and they are being built today in a number of institutions, most notably in healthcare. I mention the Cleveland Clinic because they have done some pioneering work in this field. But at this point, they are far from the only medical system doing extensive work, training people, building these skills of deep human interaction, who understand that they are in the business really of building relationships. Very prominently happening in healthcare, also in the military. I mentioned that briefly. This is not a village in Afghanistan. This is Fort Irwin, California, where the Army recreated villages, Afghan and Iraqi villages, because they understood that bringing troops through these settings, where they have hired hundreds of people who speak the native languages that are appropriate, training people in these settings is the key to mission success. The point to take is they have devoted tremendous resources to creating high-fidelity simulations for training these skills, which is the most effective way to do it. Happening at top business schools, this happens to be Stanford, happening right up here at Harvard Business School as well, and many others, they have revolutionized their curricula to train these skills. Everybody has to work in teams like this one, and they put their students through high-fidelity simulations with boards of directors and venture capitalists, because these schools realize that that's going to build the most valuable skills for them. And it's happening in corporations too. Uniqlo, Google, many others training their employees in these skills. These are all trainable skills. Here's the bottom line. From now on, success is becoming less about what you know and more about what you're like. This is a profound change from where success has come from in the past. But as technology advances, this is where success increasingly comes from now. And as a result, we must look not just outward for guidance as we have always done before, but also inward, into ourselves. because that's where these new high-value factors reside. What it means is, in the deepest possible sense, you've already got what it takes. These deep human skills are in us. They have always been in us. They're in us now, every one of us, and they want to get out. What it takes to succeed in this economy, in this world, is in you and me, in us already. And so my plea to you is, now release it for all that it's worth. It's an honor to speak with you about these things. Thanks, everybody.